Get Australia out of this toxic relationship now. And Anna Bligh is a liar. 97% of Aussies want cash. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 13th of March 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa. And for the record, I am the Victoria Senate candidate, which we have to mention more and more because elections underway.
Yes.
And there was a Senate candidates debate for Victoria last night on social media, and I was excluded. And so I've challenged the host of that debate why I was excluded. This is the second election in a row I've run as a candidate. So just remember, if you want to vote Citizens Party in Victoria, I'm the Senate candidate.
And go to our website for the excellent selections of candidates all over the country, and you can read the profiles of all of our candidates because every single one of them really brings something unique to the table in terms of leadership for the future of this country. Now, on today's show, we first of all are going to talk about AUKUS and a petition we're putting out to end the AUKUS agreement immediately.
Donald Trump's done us a favour. We now have a good reason to say, look, this is what the relationship's really like. Let's get out of it.
Yes. And then we're going to discuss the latest on banking and cash updates, including a choice survey which says that 97% of Australians think that businesses should be required to accept cash. So this is most interesting. Now, please help us get the show circulating and all of our material as much as you can by hitting the like button, sharing on social media, making a comment below. All of those things will help get it out through the levels of the internet.
It'll fire up the algorithm. And I do try and respond to the comments, Elisa, as time permits. The feedback's quite valuable, so please comment.
And if you can, to help us get the word out further and to get these policies implemented, please consider making a donation, which you can do by following the link below or on the bottom corner of the screen. Also, you will see a QR code that you can scan with your phone to go straight to where you need to go to do that. So thanks in advance for that, for those who can help that way. Now, just a couple of quick updates first before we get into the main topics.
Yes, Elisa, I spent the weekend in Perth, got back on Tuesday night, where in Perth we launched the Senate election campaign for our Senate team over there, Aisha Novakovic and Rex Riles. And it was actually an iftar dinner, which is the breaking of the fast of Ramadan, because Aisha happens to be a Muslim. She's not a Muslim candidate, she's a Citizens Party candidate, but she happens to be a Muslim, and so this is a big cultural thing this time of year for Muslims, like our version of Christmas. So it was a great event, being able to enjoy the really good food there. Rex is excellent. He's actually a legendary Australian from out in the back blocks of Western Australia, Laverton. And they make a great and excellent Senate team, those two, for the Citizens Party in WA. So we'll talk about some of that a bit more later.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to update people on, which needs to be just mentioned, people would have heard it by now, but this week we got confirmation that the entire narrative of rising anti-Semitism in Australia was based on a hoax. So, and it's good that the police, New South Wales Police, have come out and confirmed it was a hoax. An organised crime character, a bikie leader, who's not in Australia at the moment, was actually instigating an appearance of attacks on Jewish targets, so he could create a leverage with the New South Wales Police to try and do some kind of a deal that benefited him in terms of repercussions that he's facing, probably wants to come back to Australia, etc. The interesting thing is the police had a sniff of this from the beginning. It was never the police that fed this narrative.
And this is the caravan laden with explosives and
exactly
the whole story.
And even the smaller attacks like the graffiti attacks, etc. The police weren't feeding the narrative. They were just getting on with their job. It was politicians that were led by Peter Dutton and people like Senator James Patterson, that were picking up and running with this narrative for their own purposes. They were demonising the broader Muslim community in Australia. They were demonising the Palestinian protesters, who, after all, are protesting mass slaughter of human beings, right? And they were trying to make... What really got to me and why we put out a statement about this is that the people that were trying to create a narrative of rising anti-Semitism, they were deliberately... It's one thing to say that that's the case and there's these attacks to prove it, but they were deliberately disconnecting it from what's happening in Gaza and saying, no, this has got nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
No, this rising anti-Semitism, this is this deep-seated ancient hatred of Jews that's bubbling to the surface,
yeah.
right? Whereas, that was just a self-serving narrative that they then used to pass these most horrific hate crime laws that are the worst attack on free speech in our history, so that without any intention, if you say the wrong thing that is deemed to be a threat to certain groups now, even if you have no intention to do that, even if you're a child below the age of 14 in a schoolyard saying it, and it's deemed to be that, you actually do face mandatory jail terms. And they rush these laws through, and they justify them based on this thing that's now been identified as a hoax. So this is the most terrible chapter in Australian policy making that I can point to, right? It was clearly self-serving, and it's a good example why people shouldn't go off half-cocked on these kind of narratives. And we should not let vested interests shut down free speech and protests under any circumstances, right? This is what they tried. They tried to make a carve out. Oh, this particular type of hate crime is so bad, this justifies it. No, under no circumstances should free speech be shut down.
No.
Right? Because the consequences are much worse.
And the attitude of some of our leaders has been, oh, well, it was a fake, but it led to these important laws. We used it to get these important laws through. So, it's just crazy. All right, so now, first topic. Get Australia out of this toxic relationship now. So, AUKUS.
AUKUS.
There's a whole bunch of things we want to talk about, as you raised. This has come to the surface in an interesting way because usually our wonderful leaders can't have a bad thing to say about the United States, but then when you get someone like Trump come forward, they're suddenly prepared to, we'll cite a few things from Malcolm Turnbull shortly. But as you said, this has brought to the surface a situation where it can now propel the independent foreign policy and independent decision making that Australia has long needed to take up.
So Elisa, we're putting out a petition, and we should actually just read it out for people. But I want to say before you read it out, Trump is not the reason we should end AUKUS.
No.
Trump has just Trump's only role is to create a backlash in Australia that has given us the excuse to say, okay, now's the time to end AUKUS. We should never have gone into AUKUS in the first place. The problems with our toxic relationship with America have almost nothing to do with Trump. They already existed. Trump didn't drag us into the wars that we're going to talk about. Trump didn't set up the military bases in Australia, right? That put a target on us. Trump didn't do that. It's just that what Trump has done is shown that when push comes to shove, and it would have been anyone else if necessary, but in this case it was Trump. When push comes to shove, America will always act in what it thinks at the time is its interest, regardless of its allies, right? So that's why we've formulated this petition the way we have, so that people can see, okay, yeah, now's the time to get out of this terrible deal.
So this is a parliamentary petition, which means it will, once we collect the signatures and you can sign online, we'll make the links available below, it will be delivered and read out in the House of Representatives. So it states, the headline is, end the AUKUS agreement immediately. This petition of concerned Australians draws to the attention of the House that the United States of America has control of large areas of Australia's land for its military bases. The USA is the largest foreign investor in Australia by far, with extensive shareholdings in Australia's biggest and most profitable corporations and other investments amounting to $1.17 trillion. The Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement is heavily in favour of the USA, which enjoyed a trade surplus with Australia in 2023 of $32 billion. Australia has supported the USA in every foreign war since the beginning of the 20th century, has supported the US policy of confronting Australia's biggest trading partner, China, at the expense of our trade, and has committed to spending $368 billion on the Australia, United Kingdom, United States agreement to buy nuclear submarines, which has been provocative to our Asia-Pacific neighbours and which experts say are unlikely to ever be delivered. Nevertheless, the US government has imposed large tariffs on Australian aluminium and steel, demonstrating that the USA will always put its national interest first regardless of its allies. This decision confirms it is time for Australia to chart our own course as an independent nation. We therefore ask the House to immediately assert Australia's independent national interest, cancel the expensive, unreliable and provocative AUKUS agreement and invest the money we save in infrastructure and services to benefit Australians.
So there you go. And a lot, like I said, a lot of those things that are the list of, all the things we've done in this relationship. And it's called toxic because it's like a dysfunctional personal, relationship between a man and a woman or something, where one side does all the giving and the other side does all the taking, right? And we're too scared to get out of it. See, because there's a funny story here. In 1990, after the Berlin Wall came down, there were Australians that were petrified at the idea, or they claimed they were, and I'm actually still not quite convinced they were, but they claimed they were petrified at the idea that now the Cold War was over, and the world could, there was a lot of trade starting with China, etc., and China genuinely was not any kind of a threat to us. The world could get on and say, okay, well, that was, 40 years of a divided world where, we're all worried about nuclear war. That's gone now. We can have a period of mutually beneficial trade, investment, building up living standards, etc. Yet these particular people in Australia said, oh no, what if America decides that all the expense it goes to of policing the world and having a presence in the Pacific and all these military bases, what if it decides, well, it doesn't need to do that anymore and pulls out? And there's one guy, the gentleman who set up the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue, he's the one in particular who said he apparently lost sleep at night at the idea the Americans would pull out because we would be unprotected. And the question is, unprotected against what? Right? I mean, I grew up in Queensland with a narrative that Indonesia is going to invade us, and early generations grew up with a narrative that China's going to invade us. And it was never true. Those countries are so busy looking after their own people, right? They're not the expense of going and invading countries and occupying. Sorry, only dumb white countries do that. That's a European thing to do. And has it worked for the Americans? It's bankrupted them, right? These other Asian countries are like, no thanks, but we convince ourselves the other way, and that's why we've got into this relationship where we just allow the United States to take more and more advantage of us because we're so desperate to keep it in the region. And just like someone who's in a dysfunctional personal relationship, at a certain point you've got to say, no, get out. Stop being afraid of the change, get out, right? Chart your own course.
So one of the things that brought that to the fore is the fact that this time around, unlike in the last Trump administration, Australia will not get an exemption for the tariffs that Trump is putting on. And so this has been all across the media in recent days. And one of the interesting things when Bob Carr was interviewed about this...
And remember our show last week? We're not getting an exemption despite going over there with our offer. Look, we've got $4 trillion in superannuation that can make America great again. And it still didn't get us an exemption.
We've already given you our country, and this is what Bob Carr actually talked about, the former foreign minister. We've done everything that the Yanks wanted, essentially, he said, including AUKUS, etc. And we've made ourselves a nuclear target in doing so. And he said that himself.
That's exactly right.
But yet we're still offering more and they're not buying it. And one of the points he made is that Australia cannot be seen as just a rusted-on ally that has no choice in the matter. We have to actually make the break from that. Now, of course, the other person that weighed in was former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. So when he was asked about whether Australia would get tariff exemptions, he said that he thought it would, and this was when he was talking to Bloomberg on the 10th of March, he said, I think it'll be harder than last time. This was ahead of the decision because the Trump team is more consolidated and more determined. And he went on about how because Trump is so chaotic and rude and abusive, where China, by contrast, he talked about President Xi Jinping being respectful and consistent. He said Trump's actually going to lead many countries to decide that they might find China a more attractive partner, which is interesting. I mean, he's wrong in the way he's thinking about it, but in fact, the reality of the world means that many countries are looking at China and thinking, well, they've got more to offer, actually.
Well, this is why, though, we're trying to be a little bit nuanced here and make people understand. It really isn't about Trump. And the tariffs are just, we're putting out this call because the backlash to the tariff decisions creates an opportunity for Australians to actually rethink this.
Yeah.
They should have rethought it all along.
Exactly.
And it's ironic that Malcolm Turnbull's the one saying that, because when Malcolm Turnbull got elected, well, remember he rolled Abbott, and then he did win one election. But when he took office, he was accused of being a panda hugger.
That's
it's called,
right, yeah.
right? So someone who's too close to China, and it was never true. But even if it was, but what he did was he employed, because we documented all this in 2020. How did our relationship with China go from being one of great enthusiasm because we've got such a beneficial trade relationship? So the whole political consensus was this is great, to one of outright antagonism by 2020 under Scott Morrison. And the person who started the rot was Malcolm Turnbull, because he employed John Garnaut. And John Garnaut was the Sydney Morning Herald correspondent who was also based in China, who was also a fellow at ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and he became Turnbull's advisor to just turn around and demonise literally everything China did, including, and this one was the big insult to China, including locking Huawei out of being able to bid to build Australia's 5G. Now, because that was a great insult to China. Huawei is their champion company, right? Huawei it just kicks butt across, it is a brilliant company. It is owned by its workers. It's owned by its workers, right? It is not that's one of the reasons the Americans hate it. They can't go and buy shares and take it over, right? It's owned by its workers.
BlackRock.
It produces this incredible technology. The narrative that it could be used for spying, that was never true. The only truth there was that Huawei technology can't be spied on by the Americans. They literally spy on every other form of technology. They can't spy on Huawei technology.
Yeah.
When the British wanted to use Huawei technology, the way they dealt with the narrative about spying is GCHQ, which is the most advanced communications spy system in the world, they set up a special annex to physically check all the Huawei technology coming to the country, because it's not magic, this technology. It's got to be actual hardware, it's got to be software. You can identify what it is that's doing the spying. And they checked it all and there was nothing there. But we ran this, what we did was massively insulting to the Chinese when we just said, no, you're not going to be part of that. And Malcolm Turnbull did that. Right, and got the ball rolling, and then all this anti-China stuff just bubbled from there.
So anyway, Trump responded to Turnbull, interestingly enough, on a Truth Social post where he said, Turnbull never understood China, and I think he was a weak and ineffective leader. And then Turnbull came back on 7:30, and this was where he said the same famous line about, are we just going to become a conga line of sycophants creeping through the White House, paying homage to this guy and telling him he's a genius, right? So, but they never say that when the leaders in the White House are actually promoting.
Come to this war with us.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. President, right? Vote this way at the UN. Yes, Mr. President, always. And this is why. So, just to reiterate, it's not about Trump. Turnbull's relationship with Joe Biden was worse than Albanese's relationship with Trump. It was more damaging to Australia than Albanese's relationship with Trump. That's the way you've got to understand this.
All the damaging stuff was already there.
It's about how we see ourselves, and those are the people that have brought us into this position. This is just an opportunity to get out of this position.
Yeah, no.
Now, Elisa, though, we've got to, should I mention this now?
Yeah, sure.
Because thanks to John Lander, our friend, the former ambassador, we'll put this on the screen. This is a great cartoon he commissioned, because this sort of epitomises it, because what you've got with the duopoly now, the Labor and Liberal Party, they are spending, as they've calculated, AUKUS is 35 million a day for 30 years.
Yeah.
And we won't get, and that comes with no guarantee that we'll get anything.
Yep.
Right? And you don't get a clawback.
No.
You don't get your money back. If the Americans and the Brits turn around at a certain point and say, oh, sorry, we won't be able to build those submarines, you don't get your money back. And we've already handed over literally billions of dollars. And so this is a desperate family, who can't afford housing in Australia, which of course is the story of Australia's economy. Help us house our family. Sorry, we need this money for our war against China.
Yeah, because as we've written in the past, the treaty that we signed with the US and the UK, which might still be pending decision in the Parliament, but so perhaps it could be overruled there, but or ratification, I should say. But it says that Australia would bear the entire cost, including all liabilities incurred by AUKUS, even if the deal gets pulled off. And the deal can be called off, I should say, by the US or the UK within 1 year's notice, and they get to keep the money. So, as you said, no clawback. But this is where now, all of a sudden, amid this debate on the tariffs, there's a number of people, including Admiral Chris Barry, who's called for a plan B for a different way, a different pathway to get a submarine fleet, and he's the former head of the Defence Force, because he actually said the US,
Navy, specifically the Navy.
US is an unreliable ally under Trump, so we need a plan B in case AUKUS falls apart. And then retired Rear Admiral Peter Briggs has said we should apologise and renegotiate with the French. So yeah, look.
Whereas we would say that it's not. Of course, Australia needs to have proper defences. That goes without saying. But if you really want proper defences, have a proper economy that can invest in anything like that. Because what we don't have is a proper economy.
Exactly.
Right? We've been bankrupting ourselves for years under this neoliberal policy. So a proper economy starts first, and you can have the proper defences. But a greater defence than the ability to attack is diplomacy. Literally, there is no reason we can't get on with our neighbours in the regions. Right? If you genuinely want to get on and collaborate with your neighbours, rather than the message they've been getting for decades is, we're this country that sees that only our two most powerful white friends, the United Kingdom and the United States, can protect us from these scary countries in the region. And what sort of message does that send? Right? And there's no need for it. We have enormous synergies in terms of our economies with these countries, right? They've got large populations. We could be the food bowl of Asia. We could build the infrastructure and the trading infrastructure and the ports and all that kind of thing to get food to those places really quickly. We've advocated this sort of thing for decades. That economic cooperation with those countries is a greater protector than all the weaponry in the world.
Yeah, and helping to rescue America's economy, which is part of what AUKUS is doing. So please follow the link and sign the petition yourself, and please circulate it as well through social media, etc., and any other way you can. Right, number 2, Anna Bligh is a liar. 97% of Aussies want cash. And speaking of petitions, you can go to Choice's website. We can put the link below. They're circulating a petition which simply says this: to the federal government, I call on you to protect the future of cash by ensuring it remains accessible, accepted for essentials, and there are no surcharges for using cash, which is something that's been foreshadowed.
Yeah.
What we wanted to discuss today briefly with some other banking updates is that there's, as we've mentioned before, the government has a consultation about mandating cash acceptance for essentials. It's got too many loopholes and all kinds of problems that we've referenced in the past.
Well, they say, well, we're going to mandate that businesses that sell essential goods and services must accept cash, but then they're going to have an exemption for small business, which is 97% of businesses.
Yeah. So now Choice has skewered a number of these issues in a submission that they made with several other agencies to this Treasury consultation.
An excellent submission.
So, and we've written it up. We can read more of the details in the Australian Alert Service this week. But they did a survey, which they said, this is what they said about the survey. While use of cash has decreased in recent years, this should not be interpreted as a sign that people no longer need or care about the ability to use cash. Over the last 2 months, Choice surveyed 12,999 supporters to gauge sentiments towards cash. And one of the findings was that cash, they say, will be required to play an important role in Australia for the foreseeable future because of the fact that over 97% of the survey respondents said it is very important or quite important that businesses selling essential goods and services should be required to accept cash. So in other words, it's there for redundancy. It's not that they're always going to pay with cash, but the capability has to be protected.
Yep.
They stated in their submission...
Sorry, just to contrast, the same survey said should businesses be required to accept card payments?
Yeah.
And 92% said yes. So the percentage that said cash should be accepted is significantly greater than the percentage that said cards should be accepted. Yeah,
I mean, nearly 100%. And in that submission, they said our main concern with the proposal, because they welcomed to have a cash mandate, it's a good thing, of course, but they said our main concern relates to the impact in regional and remote areas because regional and remote communities are likely to be more reliant on cash and more likely to be dealing with small businesses, which of course, as you said, are exempted. So they said the proposal in the paper needs to be amended if it is to deliver good outcomes for these communities. And they stated this, that the government must act to guarantee reasonable access to cash for everyone. Further, defining what constitutes reasonable access to cash should not be left to the banking or other industry sectors. For some parts of Australia, there is evidence access to cash is already at crisis point, indeed.
And that's when I cheered when I read that part of the submission, because that's his choice, which, the consumer lobby group, right, for consumers, they've got it.
Yeah.
This is what the government has been doing up until now, is outsourcing this responsibility to the private banks.
Exactly.
And their lobbyist, Anna Bligh, has been going around the country for years lying her head off. Australians don't want cash. Australians are leaping into this brave new world of digital payments, etc., etc. She's been saying that from one end of the country to the other, and it's been a crock. The whole time it's been a crock. And she's been it's been self-serving because, of course, if you're not using cash, every transaction that you engage in without cash goes through a bank. And that gives that bank more power than not, right?
And more money.
They can monetize the data, they take a cut of the transaction, and generally though, this question of power is at a certain point, banks like doing things like debanking, they can just cut off whole businesses, etc. And if everyone is reliant on banks for all transactions, the banks will be able to start dictating people's lives.
Absolutely, as they are. And they made a couple of final points. One is they say, we have no confidence the private market can deliver solutions. The government has to do it. And finally, the government, when it announced recently that it would, try to solve the problem by expanding Bank at Post and putting a moratorium on regional branch closures, they said, look, that just is not good enough. First of all, there are big loopholes, it said, to the moratorium, where you have banks setting up cashless bank branches and saying, we haven't closed our bank, or just transforming it into cashless, and reducing hours and things like that. So these things need to be addressed. Now, one of the pathways to addressing it, bringing us to the next part of this story, is what we've proposed and what was raised by the Regional Bank Closures Inquiry that the government should look at, and actually have an expert panel to delve into, is, of course, a public bank in the post office, so a postal bank. And this was raised in an article that came out on the 2nd of March talking about remote Western Australian communities. And we also wanted to talk about it in conjunction with, as you said, we just had our campaign launch in WA, and we've got people intersecting this issue through, decades and decades of work to try to revive the communities that are being shuttered across remote parts of Australia. And Western Australia is one of the biggest chunks of the country.
Well, and we have this program in Australia called Closing the Gap, because everybody acknowledges there is a gap in living standards and equality between Aboriginal Australians and the rest of Australia. There actually is a gap. It's in life expectancy and all sorts of things, right? Now, it's a complex problem, and there's lots of people of goodwill thinking about this. The governments are often not very good at what they do, but nevertheless, people acknowledge the problem, and so there's a program Closing the Gap. And we just raised the question: why are the banks exempt from closing the gap? Because whereas bureaucrats and other businesses, etc., have been in local government, they've got to twist themselves in knots trying to think, how can we make sure this benefits Aboriginal communities? Aboriginal communities, First Nations, are one of the sectors that's most disadvantaged by losing bank branches, because they often, especially in these remote places like Western Australia, English is their second language, right? They need to have a bank account. They go to the bank, and the local bank will just know them by name. The staff knows them, and knows their account, and will give them the money they need and do it for them. And that's a working relationship. It works for both sides. When the bank pulls out, they can't do that, and they're told to go online, all this sort of stuff. And it's exactly the same problem that the elderly face, etc. But because there's this national program to close the gap, we just said, well, hang on. Every other business, all the banks endorse The Voice, for instance, and it was all just hypocritical virtue signalling, right? The actual practical things to do to support
have a branch,
right? They're not. They get exempt from that. We said this is unacceptable, and this led to some good coverage in Western Australia. Yeah.
Now this ABC article I mentioned talked about Leonora, the once bustling town 800 kilometres northeast of Perth, is now among the many regional Australian towns that no longer has a bank. Now, it is, by the way, north of Kalgoorlie, and another 1.5 hours to Laverton, where our Senate candidate, Rex Riles, is from, who you mentioned before, is a legend in the area. Actually, you can find a profile of him on the National Road Transport Museum website. He founded the Outback Highway Development Council to upgrade and seal Outback Way, which we'll put up a map, is a road that goes from Laverton to Winton, Queensland via the Northern Territory. It's described as the longest shortcut ever, but it's an alternative route across the country, which, when foreigners come to this country and see there's only one road going across.
I'm guessing this is where this features in Outback truckers a lot. This road.
Yeah, no doubt.
And Rex Riles has played a big role in the promotion and of upgrading and sealing that very important piece of infrastructure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in any case, the ABC article goes on to say that as a result of not having a bank, people have been turning to the lady featured here, Miss Cottrell, who works at the Shire's Community Resource Centre. She said that because the banks are instructing the clients to go to the nearest bank, which is 234 kilometres away in Kalgoorlie, they come into our office, and she said, I help them with their banking, going online for them and so on and so forth. And she said, they get told to download the app on their phone, but they don't have a phone, or they can't do it, or the connectivity is an issue, etc., etc. But then the article goes on to raise the case of the Shire of Ashburton, which is 1,400 kilometres north of Perth, which we found out when you went to one of the banking regional bank closure hearings last year. They had hired the advisory firm KPMG to investigate the feasibility of the local shire itself setting up a local government-owned bank. So they talked about that in the article as well, and the fact that the banking inquiry had recommended public banking as one of the solutions to this problem. This is rather interesting. Now,
just before you go on, in the Ashburton hearing, which was held at the town of Tom Price, the local Ashburton Aboriginal Corporation head gave testimony, and she put more description on this question of what happens with Aboriginal people and losing banks. She made the point they already tend to live in these remote communities, and they're a long way from the bank anyway. So when the only bank branch that they're already a long way from closes, and they've got hundreds more kilometres to go to, it's just impossible. She said apart from needing cash, one of the other things they tend to need is IDs. And you need an ID for things like a mobile phone account, right? And if they don't, they would go to the bank and get an ID to be able to do that. And the bank's not there anymore, and that's so they can't get the mobile phone account. And she said, you need an ID to sign up to online banking, right? They can't get that, yet they're told go to online banking, and it just becomes a compounding problem.
And their last bank closed in 2022, and it's now 6 hours by dirt road to the closest bank. So, you know, no wonder they're thinking, okay, can we do this ourselves? If banks, private banks, the private market, the private sector is not going to deliver, which it has not delivered for most Australians, we have to look at the government stepping in.
The Shire of Ashburton is about half the size of Victoria, and there's not one bank in the entire Shire.
Shocking. And you were able to discuss this also while you were in Perth in the studio at 6PR.
Yeah, Aisha Novakovic and I went into the 6PR studio, which is the biggest radio station in Perth. That's us there with Ollie Peterson, the afternoon host. Ollie, I'll give enormous credit to because he jumped on this issue of branch closures straight away, and not only did he follow it all through the course of the inquiry, but he also jumped on the solution. Right, he saw straight away, hey, the solution is a postal bank, and he's been using his platform on Perth's biggest commercial radio station to promote that. So we had a great chat with him, and in fact, we could probably even put that link below if people want to hear the discussion that we had.
Yep.
And it's just about getting the message out there. And Aisha's a lawyer, by the way, so she deals with represents a lot of communities in different legal situations, including the family law court, etc. She has a lot of experience with helping people, including Aboriginal Australians, and so that's why she became a Citizens Party candidate, because that's what our whole outlook is for. Not be ideological on issues. How do you solve problems, right? And we need the postal bank because it'll solve so many problems. It's not funny. And it's certainly not funny to the banks if we ever get one.
Yes. So you can help promote our candidates. You'll find on our YouTube channel lots of shorts where you can circulate those. You can also contact us on our toll-free number to get flyers about who is the Australian Citizens Party, because you'll find a lot of people might not have heard of us before. But one of the points that Aisha has made in terms of speaking to lots of different communities and sectors everywhere is that it's a no-brainer. Once you tell people what our policies are, they immediately say, well, yes, absolutely, I agree with you. You don't find too many people that are opposed to what we're proposing because it's common sense. And it's well beyond time to have these kinds of practical solutions to transform this country and our economy and our foreign policy.
Absolutely.
So do sign our petition as well when you get off this show, and promote it in any way that you can. So that's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And tune in again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.